Welcome to Agora Nexus with Atabai, where knowledge and awareness converge. Wisdom begins with curiosity. The unexamined life is not worth living.
What happens after we die? I mean, it's one of humanity's oldest questions, isn't it? Echoing down through history, sparking all sorts of beliefs.
Absolutely. And one idea you find almost everywhere, in some form, is reincarnation, this notion that, well, maybe death isn't quite the end. Maybe we come back.
Exactly, the idea we return in another body. It's fascinating, and it's incredibly widespread, as your sources show, but it's also deeply debated.
Oh, hugely. Exploring the material you provided, you see this amazing range. Different beliefs, deep philosophical arguments, some really intriguing stories, but also quite a bit of skepticism.
Right, so that's our goal for this deep dive. We want to unpack the core idea based on your sources, see where it's found across cultures and time, look at some of those standout examples people talk about, and really examine the arguments for and, importantly, against it.
Sounds good. We're aiming to give you a clearer picture of this whole complex subject, drawing directly from the sources.
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. What is reincarnation, fundamentally?
Well, at its heart, it hinges on what's sometimes called the survival hypothesis. That's the philosophical idea that some part of you, maybe your personality, your consciousness, maybe a soul carries on after your physical body dies.
And then eventually finds its way into a new body.
Precisely. And your sources show that this isn't some new concept. People have been grappling with it for millennia, using all sorts of different terms.
Like transmigration of the soul, I saw that mentioned, even in modern philosophy.
That's one, yeah. The ancient Greeks had metempsychosis, which you see linked with Pythagoras. That really emphasizes the soul's journey, separate from the body.
And palingenesis.
Another Greek term, basically just meaning being born again. Simple enough.
And if we look eastward, particularly to ancient India, your sources mention Punarjan men.
Right, it's a key Sanskrit term meaning rebirth or transmigration. It's really central to Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism.
And it's not just Greece and India. You find related ideas elsewhere, too.
Oh, definitely. Your sources point to Gilgul Neshamot, the cycle of souls, in Kabbalistic Judaism, or terms like Siai in the Sira religion of West Africa, Etunwe, among the Yoruba. It shows how universal this kind of thinking or questioning is.
And it's not just a simple belief, is it? It immediately brings up some huge philosophical questions.
It really does.
Oh, no.
Straight away, you bump into the mind-body problem. If you continue, how does that consciousness or soul connect with and control a completely new physical form?
Yeah, how does that work? And maybe even trickier, personal identity.
Exactly. What makes the you in this life the same person as the you in a past life or a future one? Especially if memories, personality, maybe even gender or species are different. It's a massive philosophical hurdle.
It really underscores that this is deep philosophical territory, not just spiritual belief. Okay, so we have the core concept. Let's zoom out. Where do your sources show this idea taking root historically and culturally?
Well, the roots are ancient. We mentioned India and the Greek pre-Socratics. Your sources also mention the Celtic Druids. There's even an account by Diodorus Siculus suggesting the Druids might have been influenced by Pythagoras on this.
Interesting. But the Indian religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, that's where it seems most deeply embedded, right?
Undeniably. In all three, you find this concept of rebirth happening within a vast cycle called samsara.
Sasara, is that seen as a good thing?
Not necessarily. Often, it's seen as a cycle tied to suffering, driven by ignorance and karma. The real goal isn't endless rebirth. It's actually liberation from the cycle, achieving moksha in Hinduism, nirvana in Buddhism, kaivalya in Jainism.
And how do you achieve that liberation?
Through various paths, depending on the tradition, but generally involving virtuous conduct, ethical practices like nonviolence, compassion, meditation, and gaining spiritual wisdom or insight. And crucially, your karma, your actions and their consequences determines the nature of your future rebirths within that cycle.
Now, this is where it gets fascinating because your sources highlight a key difference within these traditions about what exactly is being reborn.
Yes, that's critical. Hinduism generally posits an Atman, an eternal, unchanging soul that travels from life to life.
Okay. An enduring soul.
But Buddhism, according to your sources, teaches anatta, which means no soul or no self.
No soul. So how does rebirth happen then?
It's viewed more like a flame passing from one candle to another. There's a continuity of consciousness or karmic energy, a causal link, but no permanent, unchanging thing that moves across. It's a stream of becoming, not a fixed entity.
That's quite different. And Jainism.
Jainism has yet another take. They believe the soul, the jiva, is real, eternal, and individual. After death, it moves instantly to a new body, its destination determined purely by its accumulated karma. But the soul itself is seen as intrinsically pure, just obscured by karma.
Wow. So even where reincarnation is central, there are these really fundamental disagreements about what reincarnates. Now, what about the Abrahamic faiths? Judaism, Christianity, Islam? The general view there is different, right?
That's a really important distinction.
Hmm.
Generally, no. The mainstream in these religions teaches one life, followed by a final judgment, and in Christianity and Islam, resurrection of the body, not reincarnation into a new one. Islam is particularly explicit about a final resurrection.
But your sources mentioned exceptions, minority views within these traditions.
Yes, and they're quite fascinating. Historically, you had groups like the Cathars in medieval Europe who believed in it, and today you find it in more mystical or specific branches,
Like, cool.
like Kabbalistic Judaism and some streams of Hasidic Judaism, where the idea of Gilgul, or soul cycling, is an esoteric belief. It's not mainstream Orthodox teaching, but it's there in mystical texts like the Zohar and the teachings of Isaac Luria.
Okay. Any other groups mentioned?
Definitely. The Druze community, primarily in the Levant. For them, reincarnation isn't just a belief, it's a paramount tenet, as your sources state.
Really? How does their view differ?
They believe it's instant the soul moves to a new human body immediately upon death. It's always human to human. Souls are finite in number and indivisible. Heaven and hell aren't places, but spiritual states related to understanding truth and escaping the cycle.
And they have people who remember past lives.
Yes, the sources mention the Natek, rare individuals who are said to recall past lives, often ones that ended violently. Then you have Alawites, Rastafarians, Rosicrucians, some Sufi groups, and even some Muslims in parts of South Asia or Indonesia, where local beliefs perhaps blended.
And Christianity, you said the official stance is rejection.
Yes, the Catholic Church, for example, points to verses like Hebrews 9.27, people die once, then face judgment. Reincarnation is explicitly rejected.
But do everyday Christians sometimes believe it anyway?
Interestingly, yes. Surveys mentioned in your sources show a noticeable minority of Christians in America and Catholics in Europe actually do hold some kind of belief in reincarnation. Some try to interpret certain Bible passages differently, like Jesus being asked if John the Baptist was Elijah returned, but traditional theology generally reads those metaphorically.
So it persists even against official doctrine. What about other traditions beyond these big systems?
Your sources touch on quite a few. There are hints in Taoism, maybe, with legends of Lao Tzu reappearing. There were definitely persecuted groups in the European Middle Ages who held reincarnationist views, and it's present in many indigenous traditions.
Like which ones?
Well, the Inuit have a form of namesake reincarnation, believing a child named after someone deceased inherits qualities or aspects of their spirit. The Ho-Chunk Nation in North America has oral traditions, like the story of Thundercloud, who spoke of returning multiple times.
And Africa. You mentioned the Serer and Yoruba earlier.
Right. West African traditions, like the Yoruba, have complex ideas. Ipahadwe about ancestors returning in newborns, the concept of Abiku children believed to be spirits who are born only to die young repeatedly, and Akudaya, souls said to wander after death to fulfill destiny. And the Sura religion's concept of Sai.
It really is everywhere, in so many forms. And what about today, in the modern West?
There's definitely increased interest, often outside traditional religious structures. It pops up in various New Age or spiritual movements. Spiritism, Theosophy, Scientology, Wicca, Anthroposophy are mentioned. These often link it to ideas of spiritual evolution or karma.
And general belief seems higher now.
Surveys suggest so. A significant percentage of Europeans and North Americans say they believe in some form of it. For some, it seems to offer a way to make sense of suffering or perceived injustices in the world.
Okay, so we have this incredibly widespread, ancient idea, diverse expressions, deep philosophical ties. What actually makes people believe it? What kind of proof or evidence gets talked about in your sources?
Well, beyond the philosophical or moral justifications like allowing for atonement or feeling connected to ancestors, a lot of the modern focus, particularly in the West, is on anecdotal evidence. Stories.
Stories of people remembering past lives.
Exactly. Especially young children. Your sources highlight a few well-known examples often discussed.
Like who?
There's the case of Sonam Wangdu, a Tibetan boy. Based on signs before his birth and things he said and did as a toddler, he was identified as the reincarnation of a specific lama. He was then raised in a monastery following that tradition.
Okay, that's tied into a specific cultural belief system. What about cases outside of that?
A very famous one is James Leninger, an American boy. From a very young age, he apparently had vivid nightmares and made startlingly specific claims about being a World War II fighter pilot named James, who flew off a ship called the Natoma and was shot down.
And did the details check out?
According to the accounts, his parents investigated and found records of a pilot named James Houston who flew from the USS Natoma Bay and was killed in action during the Battle of Iwo Jima, matching many details the boy, James Leininger, had mentioned. The sources note his parents wrote a book, and that therapy helped him manage the distressing nightmares.
Wow, that's quite specific. Any others mentioned?
There's a more unusual one. Vladimir Levinsky, an English pianist, noted for extraordinary talent who, at times, identified himself as the reincarnation of Franz Liszt. Apparently, during performances, he can become intensely focused, almost channeling Liszt.
So these personal stories are powerful. Have they been studied seriously?
Yes, they've prompted academic investigation. Most notably, work done at the University of Virginia, initially by Dr. Ian Stevenson and continued by Dr. Jim Tucker. Your sources describe how they collect and document cases, primarily involving children reporting these spontaneous past life memories.
How do they approach it? Just collect the stories?
No, their methodology, as described in the sources, aims to be more rigorous. They try to rule out fraud or normal explanations first. They interview the child, the family, witnesses. They try to verify the specific factual claims the child makes against historical records or information about a deceased person.
And critically, when do they verify the information?
They try to document the child's statements before any potential matching deceased person is identified or researched by the family. Dr. Tucker, for instance, is reported in your sources to claim that key details in the James Leininger case were documented before the family found out about James Houston.
Okay, so you've got these ancient roots, philosophical depth, these really compelling personal stories, and even some researchers trying to investigate scientifically. That seems like a strong case for it. But what about the other side? What does the skeptical view also in your sources say?
And this is where the critical lens really comes in. The biggest hurdle, from a scientific standpoint, is the straightforward lack of conclusive, verifiable evidence. Your sources are clear. No research has actually proven reincarnation exists.
So current science doesn't support it.
Not really. Fields like psychology and neurophysiology generally work on the assumption that personality and consciousness are tied to brain function and cease with death. There's no widely accepted scientific mechanism for how they could survive and transfer.
And those philosophical problems we touched on earlier, they're part of the critique too.
Absolutely. Critics hammer on the personal identity issue. If there's no memory link, what really connects you now to you then? What is this thing that supposedly reincarnates? Is it fixed? Can it change? Can one soul be linked to many different people over time? These remain major conceptual challenges.
The sources also mentioned inconsistencies with, like, evolution and population growth.
Right? Critics ask, if souls are eternal and cycle through bodies, where were they before humans evolved? And if the number of souls is constant or finite, how do you explain the massive increase in human population over the centuries? These are logical challenges raised against some models of reincarnation.
Okay. What about those compelling anecdotes, the stories of children remembering things? How do skeptics explain those?
They offer alternative explanations, and the key one mentioned in your sources is cryptomnesia.
Cryptomnesia? What's that?
It's basically unconscious plagiarism, or hidden memory. The idea is that the information the child reports didn't come from a past life, but from sources they encountered in this life. Maybe things they overheard, saw in a movie, read in the book, but consciously forgot. Later, their mind pieces it together into what feels like a real memory from somewhere else.
So forgotten knowledge from this life, not a past one.
That's the argument, yes. Thinkers like Melvin Harrison Edwards, cited in your material, argue this is a much more likely explanation for many cases than actual reincarnation.
What other explanations are offered?
Suggestion and confabulation are big ones, especially when you talk about things like past life regression therapy using hypnosis.
Suggestion and confabulation, like making up memories without realizing it.
Pretty much. Research shows that under hypnosis, or even just through leading questions, people are very susceptible to suggestion. Their expectations, the therapist's beliefs, vague feelings, they can all get woven into detailed memories that feel real, but are actually constructed from imagination, existing knowledge, and hints picked up during the session.
So the memories might not be genuine recall at all.
Exactly. They can be indistinguishable from false memories. And the sources also raise the possibility of, well, less innocent motives sometimes.
Like what?
Ian Wilson, mentioned in your sources, points out that especially in societies where reincarnation belief is strong and there's poverty, claims by a child to remember being someone wealthy or important in a past life could potentially be a way for the family to gain attention or financial support. It has to be considered as a possibility in some contexts.
And even in the really detailed cases, like James Leininger.
Even there, some critics, like French, cited in your sources, suggest that if you look closely, some of the connections might be more ambiguous or open to interpretation than they first appear, perhaps not quite the perfect matches they're sometimes presented as.
So less definitive proof, more interpretation.
That's the critical perspective. And fundamentally, skeptics often bring up Occam's razor.
The idea that the simplest explanation is usually best.
Right. If you can explain a child's unusual statements through cryptomnesia or suggestion, is invoking an entire metaphysical system of reincarnation really necessary? Is there any observable difference between a baby born with an old soul and one with a new one, or none at all? And does the way good and bad things happen in life really look like a system of karmic reward and punishment, or more like random chance?
That's a strong challenge. What about past life regression as a therapy? How do the sources view that?
Critically, it's often labeled a pseudoscience. Your sources raise serious ethical concerns, not just the lack of evidence that it accesses real past lives, but the real danger of creating vivid, convincing false memories.
False memories being harmful.
Potentially very harmful, yes. They can cause distress, affect relationships, and be very difficult to correct once embedded. Critics argue it violates the basic medical principle of first, do no harm.
Wow. One source even used the phrase crucifixion of one's intellect regarding accepting reincarnation uncritically.
Yes, that quote from Edwards highlights the view from some critics that believing it requires setting aside rational thought or scientific evidence. It shows just how deep the divide is between belief and skepticism on this.
So after digging through all this material you shared, where does it leave us? It's quite a journey. We've seen this idea woven through millennia across so many cultures, tackling these huge philosophical questions.
Absolutely. And we've seen the power of personal stories, the accounts that really resonate with people, and have even led to formal investigations trying to find, some kind of proof.
But then we've also explored the very significant skepticism, the tough philosophical questions about identity, the lack of clear scientific backing, and these alternative explanations for the very phenomena believers point to: cryptomnesia, suggestion, all that.
It really seems understanding this topic means holding both sides in mind, doesn't it? The deep-seated belief and spiritual significance for millions alongside the serious scientific and logical challenges. It's not simple.
No, definitely not. It's a complex tapestry, as you said earlier. Well, thank you for guiding us through this deep dive based on your sources. Hopefully, for you listening, this exploration has offered some clarity, maybe some surprising angles on the core ideas, the sheer breadth of belief, and the strong counter-arguments.
It definitely gives you a lot to mull over.
It really does. Considering how long this belief has endured, how compelling some of the stories are, and yet how strong the scientific and philosophical pushback is, it kind of leaves you wondering, doesn't it? Is the lack of hard proof just a reflection of what we currently can't measure or understand? Or is the phenomenon itself, just not real? And maybe, seeing how much humans want to believe in some kind of continuation, what does that tell us about ourselves?
If you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any episode. Your support means the world to us.